Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. This is Steve Wexler. I am one of four hosts of Short Chat. Delighted to have you joining us today with our guests, Steve Franconeri and Stephanie Woerner. Give me 1 second to get this queued up. There we go. And this data viz stuff works, and we have evidence. I am Steve Wexler. I am the founder, principal, and chief chart looker-adder at Data Revelations. I am also the author of The Big Picture, and co-author along with Jeffrey Shaffer and Andy Cotgreave of The Big Book of Dashboards. And I'd like to introduce you to my fellow hosts. We will meet Steve and Stephanie in a moment. But first, let me start with Amanda Makulec.
Hello, and delighted to have everyone here today, especially Steve and Stephanie. I'm Amanda Makulec. I am the current executive director for the Data Visualization Society and a health data visualization designer based here in Washington, D.C. I'll go ahead and I'll hand the mic over to my colleague, Jeff.
Hello, Jeff Shaffer here from Cincinnati, Ohio. I am a professor at the University of Cincinnati, where I teach data visualization and descriptive analytics, and I'm the vice president of IT and analytics at Unifund, also co-author of one of Steve's big books, The Big Book of Dashboards.
Hi, everybody. My name's Andy Cotgreave, senior data evangelist at Tableau, in my final month of a 4-month sabbatical. And if you're one of those people around the world suffering from this miserable cold-like, flu-like bug, then I'm here to represent you all today with this fantastically nasal voice. Great to see you all for 2023. Back to you, Steve.
But Andy, you always have us with that wonderful British accent, so no worries there. So let me just quickly go through why we're here. It's more than chit chat, it's chart chat. The purpose of Chart Chat, why we put this together, was to resurrect the fantastic debates and discussions we had in writing the Big Book of Dashboards. That was myself, Jeff Shaffer, and Andy Cotgreave. And then we had the good sense several years ago to invite Amanda Makulec to invite us. It was sensible for us to do it. Amanda, I'm wondering if it was on your end, if you felt it was so sensible. But you are very much encouraged to join the debate and disagree with us. Good things happen when we discuss this. We make better, more useful, more informative data visualizations, and it's also wildly entertaining when we discuss this stuff. So how and where can you do that? Well, if you are with us live right now, you will find some widgets inside of YouTube Live, little buttons, and you can either pop out the chat, and even better, stay with us for the after party. You can go to bigpic.me/party, and where you can join the Zoom meeting and the discussion and get to chat with our guests, Steve and Stephanie. And, well, let's meet our guests. So I'm going to ask Steve if you could just tell me a little bit about yourself and what you do, and then Stephanie, if you could do that as well. Steven.
Sure. I'm Steve Franconeri. I'm at Northwestern University in the Department of Psychology, hang out a lot as well in design and computer science in the business school. And I study visual thinking, particularly on screens and pieces of paper where we have data visualizations and diagrams, and we need to think with images.
Terrific. Happy to have you here. And I have read so much of your stuff, and it's the most refreshing research academic stuff I have ever read in my entire life. It doesn't read like academic papers. And Stephanie Woerner.
I'm Stephanie Woerner, and I'm a principal research scientist and director of the MIT Center for Information Systems Research, which is located in the Sloan School of Management. And we do research that helps practitioners, helps executives succeed in the digital economy.
Terrific. Delighted to have you here. Before we get into, well, actually, let me give you today's topics. So what's the order of things? We're going to start with Stephanie Woerner, and that dashboards and data visualization in general and the intelligence and discipline that go with it pay off. You have done research showing that organizations that are good at this stuff outperform those who are not good at this stuff. And I find that delightful information. Then we will move to Steve, who will get into actual facets of data visualization, not the broad scope of, yes, if you do this, but here are the things within data visualization that work better than other things. And you have proof, not just empirical evidence, and how both the empirical and the explicit experimental work so well together. But before I go further, I do want to have a shout out to a certain trumpet playing business professor living in Ohio. And it's not Jeff Shaffer, who is in fact a trumpet playing business professor living and working in Ohio, but my friend and classmate Bill McHenry at the University of Akron, who first told me about Stephanie's research and this paper that dashboarding pays off. So thank you so much, Bill. Hope you're listening, or we'll watch the recording later. And Stephanie, if you can walk us through some of the stuff that you've done and are doing, including some very fresh new research.
Great. Thank you so much. So we started this research. Actually, it's kind of part of the research that we do on digital transformation. And as part of the work on transformation, we were trying to figure out what is it that companies that are further along and seem to be doing better financially, what are some of the practices that they have in place? And one of our hypotheses was that dashboarding was important, that this discipline that you have around keeping track of where you are and how you're doing, and ideally articulating the logic between your everyday practices and how you make money. But first, next slide. Just wanted to give you a very quick introduction to MIT CISR. MIT CISR has been around since 1974. As I said in the intro, we help large companies. We do research that points out how large companies can transform themselves to compete in the digital economy. We're at MIT, and we would love you to take advantage of our research. So you'll see cisr.mit.edu up at the top of that page. Please go to cisr.mit.edu, and if you register with your email, you can download all of the research that you can find in the website. So we have those 3-page research briefings. We have some case studies. We do about 8 research projects a year, and we really want to try to evangelize what large companies can do, especially what we fondly call big old companies. So let's go to the next slide, please. So latest research, we're trying to figure out what does dashboarding look like in enterprises and why is it important? And this is some of the latest research that we have from a 2022 survey with an N of 721 globally distributed firms. And one of the questions that we asked is, when you have dashboarding data, are you filling it in from Excel spreadsheets, manually filling it in? Or are you disciplined enough, integrated enough that you can actually do this with real-time data? And some of our research is starting to show that the going to real time means that you have systems in place that are, I mean, you're really on the forefront of what's happening. You can see this in the dashboarding data. About 17% of the firms have all of their dashboards using real-time data, but really the majority of firms are using some kind of combination of manually entered data and real-time data. And this is one of the things we're going to be researching moving forward, is what does it take to get to real-time data? So I think that my piece here is I'm going to be talking about the practices, but I bet that Steve and some of the other people on this call are going to talk about what does a great dashboard look like. And then
we're also going to talk about, probably ask you what you mean by real time, but I'm not going to derail you just yet.
Okay, that would be a great question to get to. And then when we talk about enterprise dashboard use, one of our hypotheses is that companies that the better companies, the companies that are performing better, are going to be using their data really widely, not just in teams, but also all the way up to the top management team and at the board level. And so we then did some research, and this is what Steve saw, and what was in that research briefing was that companies that were highly effective at dashboarding outperformed. So what we looked at was companies, and this is perceptual. I don't have measures of what is a good dashboard. This is really how, just asking companies, how good are you at dashboarding? And we looked at a variety of internal measures of performance and external measures of performance. And I think one of the ones that was most interesting was looking at net profit margin compared to industry and revenue growth compared to industry. What we do there is we pull in data for firms that are that give us their name and are publicly traded. I can pull in their performance data, and you can see that firms that say they are very good at dashboarding have a higher net margin, 8.4 percentage points better than industry average, than companies that are really at the very low end of dashboarding, really in the lower quartile. And they have a higher revenue, again, 11 percentage points higher than industry average. And what's so interesting to us is these are big differences. There are not a lot of practices that show that wide a difference between bottom quartile at a practice and top quartile at a practice. I think the only other one that I've seen would be doing in IT. A lot of companies do retrospective performance reviews to see if they actually, if the projects achieved their goal. And companies that are very good at doing that, you see similar kinds of performance measures. But you can also see differences in innovation. Companies that are very good at dashboarding have higher levels of innovation. We measure that by asking companies, what percentage of your revenues come from products and services introduced in the last 3 years? You start to see differences also in cross-selling. And I think that this dashboarding reflects, as I said in the intro, this discipline that you are going to look and see how well you're doing, and kind of, and you have to put the systems in place so that you actually can get good measures out of that.
Stephanie, I'm just going to add a couple of things. Obviously, we've all seen terrible dashboards that people don't use. So it's a lot more than just making a dashboard. Okay. The other thing is you pointed out the gaps on this thing, and just look at those gaps, and they are not exaggerated. The value axis starts at 0 on these things. For those who are keeping score and wondering, hey, did the chart creator of this thing try to exaggerate the gaps? As Stephanie knows, you shared the data with me, and I couldn't resist building the barbell dumbbell connected dot plot chart here. And these gaps are really big. So,
they're significant. So if you look at a t-test, they're statistically significant. Go to the next slide, please. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Schneider Electric. Schneider Electric has done a lot of work over the past 15 years in terms of digitally transforming itself. In 2008, they were a producer of, they sold electrical supplies. So think uninterruptible power supplies, think switches, think plugs, stuff like that. But they had a vision of changing their world. And the vision was to become a global leader in energy management and automation. And so we have a case study that you can download from our website about all of the things that they did to actually transform from being from being a seller to really creating these solutions and selling the solutions. And one of the things that we've noticed over time is they're very interested in dashboarding. They brought us in probably midway through the transformation. They wanted to work on something called the digital barometer. And one thing we noticed is that was rather static. It was backwards looking, and we were not getting measures of transformation, of, I'm going to say, solutionness. And so they started working on it again. And go to the next slide. This is what they have now. They decided that a digital barometer was too, as I said, too static. It did not reflect the business logic of how they made money. And so this is what they're using now, and they call it the digital flywheel. This is a screenshot of their dashboard that they use, and they have 4 major, they're actually not business units, but these are 4 major activities that they have. And as they try to move toward transforming all of their revenues from selling to being more solution driven and more focused on energy efficiency and helping companies achieve energy efficiency. And so rather than selling products, what they want to do is manage buildings and help companies achieve those efficiencies. And I don't know their revenue model. That's one of the things that we need to talk to them about. But what you can see is they start by looking at L1, which is connectable products. So rather than just selling plugs and switches, they've actually put sensors into those plugs and switches so that there's a new source of information. But then in L2, they have edge control, and that is their platform, their EcoStruxure platform. All of that data from the connectable products goes into the edge control, and they do decision-making out at the edges. When you get to L3, that is software that helps to manage both the connectable products and the edge control. And then field services are the people that go in and fine-tune all of how the pieces work together. And it all takes place on this platform called EcoStruxure. And they see it as being, that you start at L1 and you go through, and you should be able to create some momentum here. What's interesting to us is that this diagram here actually gets used, gets presented to the board every quarter. The CIO, Jean-Pascal Tricois, actually uses this dashboard at the meetings with the business unit heads, and they put it into their, when they go out to all of the analysts, they use this as a way of describing what their business does. And everybody in the company actually knows about the digital flywheel. They've done company-wide education efforts to get everybody involved. And as you go to each of these pieces, you can drill down. So on the left-hand side, you'll see revenues, you'll see product line. There are all kinds of ways that this will allow you to drill down to the business unit field. And we have the case study. There is both the research briefing and next slide.
And I can tell you, I know my colleagues are just can't wait to hear their thoughts of this as a dashboard landing page, but we'll hold off on that for just a couple more minutes.
And we talk about it in the book, which is about digital transformation. And I'm ready and open for questions, or however you want to go from there.
Well, let me see who would like any of my colleagues like to chime in first on this. Show of hands of who's got thoughts about what they're seeing here. This, as someone who's written a book about dashboards, I love the idea that people who are good at dashboards, organizations perform better. Andy, go ahead.
Yeah, Stephanie. I mean, something we wrestled with a huge amount and caught some flack for is even going back to the basic. I mean, how did you define a dashboard?
We didn't. I mean, no. Well, when we talked about it as a way of collecting data and showing how well you were performing. We left it wide open. I mean, we were really looking at a measurement and a tracking type of capability. And I do have a colleague here at MIT who says that I need to really think about dashboarding and metrics going beyond just tracking, that really companies should be using dashboards and metrics to both predict and then to optimize behavior. So I don't think that we left it wide open, and I think that there's more opportunity there to really get into what they were thinking about.
Yeah, I think in the end, I think our definition in the book was super vague for similar reasons, and I think increasingly, I think the more you try and box yourself in with the definition, the the more problems you have down the road. Amanda, I see you're waiting to wade in.
It's such a curious question, because I think one of the places that I know that I've struggled with clients before is where there's a default of, I know I need a dashboard because maybe I read Stephanie's paper that says that organizations with dashboards are better performing. So obviously I need a dashboard, and not having a clear definition of what that looks like or means across companies can actually be a constraint or push people towards thinking they need something that is much more actually cumbersome and costly to develop in terms of developing the real-time data feeds or the data pipelines and getting all those pieces together, well, valuable in the long run, versus thinking about smaller increments of other kinds of data visualizations and data products that actually help inform decision-making. And so I'd love to kind of probe in a bit further and understand more about how those definitions feed into research, because it came up in our chat as well with the folks who are online asking about how effectiveness was defined. And effectiveness being in the eye of the beholder is both a wonderful thing, or someone could argue creates a challenge in not having a shared understanding. So as a researcher, and as we think about how what you're doing relates to our practice, how does defining those definitions actually play into more translatable research or not?
So effectiveness is actually one of those, and where we just leave it out there and let respondents talk about effectiveness. I do have measures in there where I do ask for, more. Here's your scale 1 to 5. Here's what I mean on each of the on each of the endpoints. What is interesting to me is I have a couple of measures that I use and have used over 15 years. And I look to see if my measures of effectiveness, where my hypothesis is, if you're good at this, you will be good at that. And so, for instance, on innovation, that's a long-standing measure. We've been using that for over 15 years. And I kind of know what an average is. I know what it looks like when you're top performing. And so that's one that I use to help me check what I'm doing. But I think that you're right about what does it mean to be effective? And I think I find surveys very hard to tease that out. And that's where a case study gets to be more useful. I think in terms of effective, when we were starting to think about effective, it was looking at how did the CEO of this global company, how did he think about a dashboard? What was he trying to get it? And he saw it as something that was in use every day, as something that helped both figure out how you had been doing, but also what it was you needed to do to achieve the next level of sales. And so I think that we're going to have to look at case studies more than surveys to get at this.
Interesting.
Jeff, you have a comment?
Sure, it would help if I unmute. I have a comment about the portal. I guess I think that's probably what you were getting at. I'll just say I love the portal. It was done in Tableau, so I like what they did there. Regardless of the design of it, I think it's more about the functionality to me. In the business world, I pull my hair out a lot with just the design of the Tableau server, right? You have things that are, most recently published or alphabetical order, or, you can put them in folders and try to find your dashboard. And so having portal pages, I mean, if anybody knows me the last 5-6 years, I've spent a lot of time and efforts into different types of portal pages of different projects that I've done. I think of the Splash project that I did, and having a I like the way that it's organized, right? Like the L1, L2, L3, it puts whatever dashboard they're going to into the context of the part of the cycle or the business or the thing that they're trying to track, rather than, oh, I have a marketing dashboard somewhere on my Tableau server. Let me go find it, right? And then try to remember the keyword for it and try to get to it to see what I'm trying to see. So I think I'm a fan of that.
Well, they had a real hard time getting to this, actually. The digital barometer, I mean, that's, I think, the other lesson of this is you're not going to get it right on the first try, because that digital barometer, they pulled in, and everybody, you had all kinds of people going, we need a measure for this, or we need a measure for that. And, the team that was doing the barometer was going, really, we need 10, 12. We cannot have more than that. And then when they looked at it and they started using it, they're like, well, this actually doesn't, it's only backwards looking. We don't really see how it reflects what we're trying to do. So let's go back and do it again.
My guess is there are people who were dying to see more of that dashboard, which I am as well, because you're kind of holding this up as, hey, they made this thing and they are doing great. And you've teased us by saying, and here's the top line of this thing. But this whole question of organizations that report that they are effective at dashboarding, and I just want to tie together a couple of things. We could barely agree on what a definition of a dashboard was. How do you agree on what it means to be effective at dashboarding? But you're giving us a good start with this, which is, well, it's self-reported. But these are some pretty mature organizations that are probably not going to be either under-reporting or over-reporting. Within certain standards, they're saying, yes, we're good at this, and you're teasing out reasons for why they're good at it or why they're bad at it, et cetera. In a moment, we're going to change from going to the self-reported and survey and empirical stuff and going a little more into what Steve is doing. I'm going to move to that in a moment, but any other comments or things that are really nagging at people and want to get in before we do that?
Steve.
I have a quick question. So Stephanie, I love this paper, by the way, but as you're thinking about the possible reasons why some dashboards might be more effective than others, I could imagine that at least there could be some themes, and I'm wondering if you could pull from the qualitative analyses you've done what the themes might be. Like, it could be just the basic aesthetics on the lowest level. It could be that some are more intuitive than others. It could be that some are more powerfully organized than others. From my look at your paper, it seems like the effectiveness is really driven by it's organizations that have really thought out what their goals are and really said, what do we want to analyze? And it's the thinking behind what their metrics are and what success looks like, et cetera, that seems to be what's driving it. Is that right from what the data you have?
I think that is a very big piece of it, that because what I said is, I mean, I could pull up a picture of the previous one, which was just a static barometer that, when they realized that's not right, we can't optimize or predict what we're trying to get at going forward. So yes, I think that there's this idea about business logic that's really important for a dashboard. I think have you done the training to get people to use it and to actually think about it? I think there's that. I think, does it make sense in terms of logically? Can you drill down and have that make do you get the right data? So those are some of the pieces that I would say are important.
Thanks.
All right. Any last words before we move to the other side of the studying data visualization coin? And
Only to say that the comments are incredible, and it's a real shame we haven't got the time to dive into what people are saying, but there is the after party. So anybody watching, you can stick around after we finish this live broadcast and join the after party where we can dive into these questions a little bit more deeply.
all right. Steve, what are your thoughts on the type of, well, we've already spoken very highly of the research that Stephanie is doing, but are there some academics who may not look at that as fondly as you do? And what do you think? And what are some of the things that the research that you've been doing and how?
Yeah, sure. So the best academics will see that research and see it as a really vital part of the research enterprise. I take it as like Stephanie's gone into these companies and done in-context work and talked to them and looked at these rich real-world situations. And like Stephanie's like the sun, and I'm like a planet going around the sun and trying to take the little bits of it and try to, like, this effectiveness question, right? Like, oh, well, which one could it be? And so I'll say, well, what is it? Is it the aesthetics? Is it the design? Is it the decision making? So let's take a little piece of that. Let's make a version of that problem in a petri dish. Let's get some folks to look at a problem in a simulated dashboard. And the benefit of that is it's much more controlled. We can have randomized control trials, A/B tests, where we can find out, what if we set it up this way? What if we set it up that way? So I think it's absolutely complementary. I do a little bit more lab-based work that is a little more tightly controlled, but these two ways of doing research are entirely complementary. I'll give you a sense of the kind of work that we do in the lab. Just as a brief summary, I work on the power and limits of visual thinking. So you all would probably, I don't know, the most intuitive example might be doing one of those spot the difference tasks that you did when you were a kid, where there's two pictures and you're really good at recognizing the pictures and counting the objects and knowing what the picture is. But as soon as I ask you to spot the difference, you're in real trouble, right? So there's a limit there to visual processing. Many of you are going to be familiar with that demo where a gorilla walks through a basketball game and you didn't notice it. That was my advisor's project when I was in grad school. So that's the kind of stuff that I did historically, and now I work on power and limits of in analysis of data and communication of data in data visualizations. So yeah, Amanda, please go ahead and share the screen. I'll just give you some examples. Let me start with this one. Here's a study that we had at the engineering conference, where the most major data visualization studies are presented from a couple of years ago. This is our PhD student, Christy. And you all can see that the reviewers had a field day with our title, trying to make it more precise to the point where I can't even say that. So I'm not even going to try. But let me give you a sense of what we do. So there's a bunch of, some high quality dashboard designers in the room. So I'm going to give them a task. This is actually from, and you didn't know this, but Andy runs a test prep course for high school students, tries to get them better at passing those like ACT, SAT tests. And look at that. Audrey took Andy's course. Audrey took it twice, took the test twice. Audrey's score went down. Oh, so I don't know. Andy's course is not looking so good. Let me show you some more data. Does Andy's course work on average? Did more students get better from this course or worse? Now, I think you can feel the sluggishness of this, right? So one of the limits on visual thinking is that you are slow to make comparisons. We can actually measure this. You can only make about 3 or 4 of these comparisons per second. Audrey got worse, Adina got better, Caitlin got better, etc. And so a good dashboard designer would say, well, that's because you're designing it wrong. What you really should do there is, I don't know, dashboard designers, how would you fix this?
Encode the delta.
Encode the deltas, directly depict the deltas. And now in this case, thank you, Amanda, you can see 6 students got better, 4 students got worse, but we can actually measure this. We can say, how much better is this? How much faster will you be? And there's a whole 100 other little questions we could ask about, well, what if you do it this way? What if the chart on the left had been a bullet chart, where instead of having 2 bars next to each other, you had a bar and then a benchmark next to it? Actually, we find that that's pretty darn good. You actually get halfway over to the speed that you get from showing the deltas. So that's just one little sample of the kind of work that we do. And by the way, here's how we test it. I'll give you 5 seconds to answer the question. If you get the left display, you stink. 50% is chance, right? That's not even looking at the graph. And here is 90% if you do it this way. That's as high as you get with crowd workers, because they're all, petting their cat or watching TV or something like that. And dashboard designers, I'm sorry, I know this is badly designed. I'm going to turn this on its side, and I'll put the deltas over on the right just to make our dashboard experts happy. I'll show you one other example and then pause for a bit and take some questions. I'm going to show you a scatter plot. I want to demonstrate the power and limits of your visual system. In the scatter plot, you've got blue stuff and green stuff. You've got circles and you've got X's. What I want you to do is to find the blue X's. Got them? And you can see they're only in the upper left quadrant and the lower right quadrant. So please move your hand to be congruent with that. They're either going to be here in this diagonal or here in this diagonal. I'm going to ask our hosts and guests to move your hand as fast as you can. When I show you a new scatter plot, be the first person to have their hand in the right orientation. The blue X's will only ever be in these quadrants or these quadrants. Ready? And go. Practice one. Very nice. Go. I'm going to go fast. I'm going to go fast. Keep going. Let's see who's going to win. Which of our guests and hosts will be the fastest at this task? Okay, great. So I think you found it was hard. You were using your visual filtering power to be able to pull out just that color and that shape. Question, did anybody notice anything funny during all that? Okay. So
There was a circle.
Or a dinosaur.
it was a dinosaur. So what you missed was there was, here it is, there was a green
There it is.
dinosaur.
Oh,
in
Datasaurus Rex.
set.
Oh, the Datasaurus.
The Datasaurus, you got to use the Datasaurus. So this is a demo of how your visual system can be very powerful, but you're limited in what you're processing at once. When you're focusing on the blue stuff, you actually don't focus. You actually don't process the green stuff. This
See, I think
demo
I'm even
actually
looking
is
at the
just,
bottom. I just looked at the flip on the top half of the graph.
yes, Amanda's a good cheater. So actually, in the real experiment, to keep the Amandas of the world from cheating on this task, we actually have control trials where the thing is sometimes the dots are only on the top of the bottom, and it will catch you, and then we'll yell at you if you do that. Yeah, because of Amandas, exactly. So this is, by the way, this is the grill experiment. It's exactly the same thing. So the grill experiment, the reason why you miss it is you're paying attention to the light shirts and the grill is in a dark color. Here, you're paying attention to blue and you miss what's in green. So this is just kind of repeating the grill experiment in scatter plots. But the point is, you don't just look at a data visualization and see a picture. There's a lot of processing you could be doing. You see one story at a time, one view at a time, one comparison at a time. Whether that's like which one of these two bars is bigger or what's the pattern in this. And so looking at a data visualization is this slow process of savoring the wine and reading a paragraph. It's not just like looking at a picture. And that is and there's the actual data, by the way. Don't feel bad. I showed those plots at like 2 seconds a piece. So on the internet, 90% of people missed the dinosaur when we showed it at a second, and 60% missed it when we showed it at 2.5. It's not that you can't see it. If we don't tell you to filter, if we just tell you watch, let us know if anything weird happens, then most people see it. So I'll pause there and then we can get into some storytelling topics if you like. But just want to point out that when you look at data visualizations, it's not like looking at a picture and recognize it instantly. It's more like one of those spot the difference tasks where there's a bunch of information you get quickly, and there's a lot that's limited in flow, but you don't always realize it. And good designers will design around that to make sure that you see what's important.
I have a question, Steve. So linking to this, and you talk about animation in your paper as well. And one of the things I think that exercises all of us as hosts is, given there's so many variables and there's so many possibilities, what advice do you give to somebody who's starting on this path, who, maybe they've just started their data viz career, they've joined ChartChat, and you've just said this simple task about Andy's test scores has 1,000 answers. Off you go. How do we help them?
I think that a lot of what you hear in the storytelling literature, those rules work. So let's take exploratory analysis and communication. For exploratory analysis, there's a bunch of rules that you're going to find in your dashboards book. Directly depict your deltas and keep comparisons close. Don't have them far away. There's a bunch of rules that have been developed by the practitioner community over the years. And what our job is to test them, validate that they work, and see quantitatively how much they work by, and then try to explain why in the human brain those things work. On the storytelling side, you'll get advice like give a good headline, point people to the pattern, highlight what's important, etc. And I think you can see why that's important, because if you were looking at the blue dots when you should have been looking at the green, you're going to miss a dinosaur. So I do think that there's a compact set of rules that are teachable, and there's plenty of guides out there that can get you 80-90% of the way there.
Thank you.
Amanda, go ahead, then I've got a thought, and then Jeffrey.
You mentioned, Steve, that a lot of what your research looks at says we take the rules that we as dashboard and data visualization folks have defined and created, and then test to validate if they're real, if they really actually make more effective dashboards or charts and graphs. Do you also develop hypotheses independent of those, or are you frequently kind of going to the literature to look at the rules and then testing those? How does that work from a defining your research question perspective?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, because Yeah, it's nice to be able to explain why the rules work. What the scientist's big win is to be able to produce something that a practitioner with lots of experience wouldn't have been able to do otherwise, and wouldn't have realized otherwise. I have some demos that I could show that I think fit that description, but they take too long. I would just say that is tougher. I think that is tougher in the end. The main job, I think 95% of what the scientist is going to do is take cases like the one that Stephanie has, where what is effectiveness, and really go and do the A/B tests and tease things apart and figure out what is the driving causal factor that makes a dashboard good, and also to be able to explain why the rules work, but actually coming up with something like a new graph or a new technique that a practitioner somewhere hasn't already thought of from that more art perspective instead of the science perspective is a real challenge. And those examples, when they happen, should absolutely be celebrated, but it's less often. You're right.
Mm-hmm. I see if they give your declutter and highlight paper that you did with Cole and a few others that I'll pull up a link to and put it in the chat box. It's like a nice example of a constrained test of what's more effective or not.
Yeah, if you can share my current screen, I'll just show that it's pretty quick. This is an example where there's advice that's given, and this is in collaboration with Cole Nussbaumer-Knaflic, who has been a guest on your show, and Cole, along with many data storytelling authors, practitioners, will suggest a couple of steps for your data before you show it in your PowerPoint slide. Number one, we have that cluttered slide on the left. Get rid of the extra colors, get rid of the boxes, get rid of the lines, etc. Make it clean, etc. So we'll call that decluttered in the middle. And now do your headlining and focusing and highlighting, and make sure that people see that one story so that they don't miss that dinosaur, right? So that they see the pattern that's most important. This paper, we evaluated whether these techniques work. Long story short, between cluttered and decluttered, just decluttering the graph, aesthetic benefits, professionalism, cool, no cognitive benefits that we could find. And there have been a lot of claims in the literature that there's actually cognitive benefits to this. Now, this is one test. It's a petri dish. Maybe there's another case where you could find it, but we struggled and we couldn't. From decluttered to focus, though, 4 to 5x more likely to see, remember, understand your point. This had a huge win to be able to focus people on the relevant pattern on that one. So just one example of kind of validating which tools work. And in this case, that first one didn't do much.
Jeff, you had a comment?
Yeah, well, comment and I guess a question. I mean, when I think about topics of inattentive, blindness, it's easy to overload the visual system, right? Like too much information. The focus is really, if we think about it like a spotlight, we're really only focusing on one thing at a time. And so, I get the whole decluttering thing, and that helps us not get overloaded. I wonder, have you done research in the area of because I haven't seen this, but where you're talking about, when you think about the storytelling side and what you just did on that focus slide, and you're seeing the dinosaur in the data, that means that the author of the graph came up with the story and is showing you the dinosaur, right? But in a dashboard, we may not know there's a dinosaur. And so I'm not trying to craft it to focus your attention to it. I'm trying to distract it so that you can hopefully find your own dinosaurs, right? Like I don't know where the dinosaurs are either when I build that dashboard. I'm giving you a tool to find dinosaurs.
Yeah, no, completely agree. That is, to me, the biggest difference. You ask about the definition of a dashboard. To me, a dashboard is any data display that doesn't already have a story that you're not trying to focus people on. But to get back to, the most important findings from Stephanie's paper, you have to have a good sense of what your analysis is and what your goals are and what possibilities you want to be on the lookout. I always think that a good dashboard is designed to present to you in a compact way, 4 or 5 possibilities that are most likely, that would be most interesting to distinguish among. Never to show just one, but to still showcase the space of possibilities that's most exciting, interesting, diagnostic for whatever that organization has to decide.
Steve, I'm going to ask if we can, since this notion of storytelling has now come up 2 or 3 times, can we move to the next example?
Absolutely. For storytelling, there's lots of people to talk about this. These are my heroes. You'll recognize a lot of these folks. Briefly, if I were to pick the top 3 things that you want to do to tell data stories, I would say, here's a bad example. Let's start with a bad example, and I'll not tell a data story, and I'll let you wade through this and read things and look at the chart and not know what you're supposed to be doing and start to hate me. Okay, that's enough hate. We're good. I will now give you a better headline where I tell you what you should take away from this thing. Now I'm going to take the bullets and turn them into annotations. Please always do that. That is a cognitive mess to have people looking back and forth, trying to figure out what data support this point. Always annotate whenever you can. And then lastly, I'll add some highlighting and some context to this thing. And if we run studies in our lab, this will take you 15 seconds to figure out. And this new one, this will take you 5 seconds. So that's what I mean by storytelling. And that's something that I think in a lot of the practitioner books would advocate for, exactly these 3 steps plus a handful of others. But I think these are 3 of the most important ones. And that's exactly what we tested here, because the practitioners would advocate for this, both of these steps. And this step did have a huge effect on people's understanding and memory.
Well, one of the things I think that is interesting about the Schneider Electric dashboard is there is storytelling in that. I don't think it's quite as lovely as this decluttered and focused is, but that L1, L2, L3, and especially given the context of the enterprise itself and the culture, there is a storytelling there about how do we make money, where do we intervene, and then how do we dig deeper? And so I think that we shouldn't underestimate the context of the organization as being part of the storytelling in and of itself.
Oh, and I am so envying that you're getting to see storytelling inside a dashboard, because I am skeptical about that and want to see what that looks like. I think dashboards are where you find the most amazing stories. I'm not sure about being able to tell them within the dashboard. But Steve, are there comments? But I also want to move in that last example to storytelling and story spinning. And is there are same data, same highlighting, but are there different narratives that one might be able to glean from this depending on what you'd want to emphasize? And I don't want to necessarily push you in that direction yet. Shall we go into that, or does people have some comments first?
I will wait 3 seconds for another finger to pop up.
It's pretty fun. Go ahead.
All right. Let me I'll just illustrate. This is something that's I think known to data storytelling folks. In fact, this is the example that I'll give you. If you can pop my screen share up. This is, by the way, gratuitously adapted from a New York Times interactive that I just adore. It's called One Report, Two Perspectives. And they noted at the New York Times that they're doing a lot of data storytelling. They started fretting that when they are interpreting data for others, there's an honesty component to that. Maybe there's multiple perspectives you can take. So they had this really cool interactive where you could see this is unemployment rate under Obama, and you could see the Democrat perspective or the Republican perspective, the same party or the opposite party. And you click on this little button on the top, and it says, here's how a Democrat would see this, how they annotate it. Look at this. Obama takes office, unemployment drops, go Obama. And then you could click instead on the Republican button. They maybe want to see this in a negative light, and they'd say Obama wanted 8% unemployment. That was his stated goal on the campaign trail. Look at all that area under the curve. Every pixel's 5,000 people without a job that can't put food on the table for their family. Obama. And so these different perspectives on the same data set are equivalent to what you'd get if you just said, unemployment dropped X% under Obama, or you could say Obama promised 8%, but it's at 9.5%. Like you could say those things verbally, and you could have a debate about which one is right verbally. But in the end, I take it as the visual equivalent, because when you push people toward an interpretation of a visualization, there's a million possible patterns you could be looking at. You can look at that this is lower than this, that this is a bump here, and there's 2 bumps there. How many sentences, how many observations could you make of this very simple graph? A zillion. And the visual system locks into one at a time. So whenever you're highlighting and annotating and storytelling, you are locking someone into one pattern. Great power, great responsibility.
I love this. On top of this, the Democrats and Republicans might truncate or not truncate the y-axis to emphasize the transition as well. You know, it's just there's many little other things that could be thrown into this. It's fantastic.
Yeah. But any of them, keep in mind, like any of these could be done verbally as well. These are just kind of the visual equivalents. I often see people trying to create like what is in visualizations? What are the ethics of that? And I often pop back to well, tell me why that's not the same issue for your verbal argument that you made. It makes it easier to kind of punt the hard work to the verbal argument and just say that this is the mapping to the visual of the way you'd emphasize that same statistic, that same delta, that same drop, whatever it is.
There's research out there that shows that things stick more, people believe them more when they're presented visually. I feel like I've seen that from Alberto before, which would make it like the level of necessity of thinking about the ethics of it even higher.
Absolutely. It's a multiplier on your memory. Absolutely.
Steve, because you brought up, we're now talking about kind of the ethics of this thing. I want to revisit something that we looked at in Chart Chat 32 about it's chart defaults, which in fact could be one of the issues that we had in, I'll just share mine. Sure. So I've got it queued up. But by the way, just for the record, I do not think that previous chart looked like a boa constrictor that had swallowed an elephant. So that's just my observation from that. But this, I feel conflicted because this was such a good discussion and it was happening on Twitter and my whole love-hate relationship and concerns about it. But people were looking at this chart and Mayor Adams of New York saying, oh my gosh, the violent crime has increased 7.5%. And, look at that orange bar, nice use of effective use of color there. But that bar looks significantly higher than the bar that's over to the left of this. And is he intentionally trying to exaggerate this? And in fact, some people said, well, had you set the y-axis to 0, you would see that, yes, it's up, but it's up by a modest amount, not 2.5 times as much. And then Ben Jones at Data Literacy said, well, it turns out, in fact, this may not have been intentional. It's that this is what Excel does with this particular set of data. And I encourage people to watch Chart Chat 32, where Jeff Shaffer in real time shows what happens if all the values are within the 5/6 rule. If their values are very close when in a certain thing, Excel will automatically truncate the axes. But then some additional things came up, and this is the ethical consideration, which is you're just looking at this 5-year period. What would have happened had you looked at previous periods? And you could say, look how much crime has actually decreased in the last 10 years, last 20 years in particular. And then Daniel Zvinka said, oh, here's one way to look at it within context, and then maybe we focus on the last 5 years in particular. So any thoughts on the cherry picking of a start date and things that we can put in place to make sure people are even thinking and looking at that?
For me, I don't have any quick rules because I've been through this before, and I find it to be really tough to come up with rules that apply to all these situations. You can find this paper on my website, but if someone can pop my share up, many of you are familiar with the old y-axis baseline debate, which is kind of similar to the x-axis start point issue that you just brought up. And in this case, I just want to point out that if you want to look at this paper, Mike Carell, one of the funniest people in data viz research, came up with this title. It's a Spider-Man reference, but we tried in this case to show truncation markers, etc. And what we found, long story short, is that there's no ethical quick rule, I think, to whether you should do this. The quick version is truncating is bad here when you're showing that these two bars are actually this ratio, but this is deceptive when you start this at 35, and that's kind of equivalent to that, the tick up in the line graph you just showed. But here's a climate change graph where this is a news outlet that does not believe in climate change says, look, the climate's not changing, and that's dishonest now. But here's what a scientist would do. They truncate the axis. And so in the end, it really depends. Here's what Google shows you when you ask about a stock. It's not going to show you a zero baseline. The S&P 500 has not quadrupled, but the people looking at this know, and they want that detail. So in the end, I suspect that the there's not going to be quick rules. It's going to all depend on what your argument is and what the honest interpretation is. And my role is just if somebody comes away from your graph fundamentally misinterpreting some arithmetic principle from the graph, then you've lied. And beyond that, not showing the earlier period on the x-axis, is that a lie? Yeah, kind of. But could I come up with a rule that would define that? That's tougher for me to do. Maybe others have. Maybe y'all could. Roberto Cairo probably has a good one. So I defer to others on that.
I'm going to move into the wrap up in a moment. Any
I will
any
say
additional thoughts that people are dying to get in before we do that? Stephanie, go ahead.
I was going to just add to that with Steve, is that when we're doing presentations and we run into this problem, we just actually point it out. Here's what we've done. And we can show you the whole graph, but it's awfully hard to get on this slide. But you should know these different, and we're not going to show it if it's not significant differences. So I try to footnote everything into the source.
By the way, we've all collected there are equal opportunity offenders when it comes to truncating the value axis with a bar chart. We see it with Fox News. We see it with Viktor Orban. We see it with the Biden White House. So we have lots of people are doing this to try to make things look better or worse than they actually are. Any other comments before we kind of talk about the after party, the next chart chat, and where people can find out more about Steve and Stephanie and the Data Visualization Society? So wrapping up chart chat number 37. Here is where you can find a bunch of stuff from Steve. If you're watching the recording, you can just pause it and take these myriad links in. Too many to have at the moment, but maybe just a Google search of Steve Franconeri and you'll probably find what you're looking for. Same thing with Stephanie Woerner and her colleagues and the book Future Ready, which I have and recommend, as well as the research paper. Also, if you're wondering, wow, dashboarding, that seems to be a key to success. If only there were good books and workshops on how to create dashboards, wouldn't that be something? Chart chat number 38 is coming up in February. There's the URL for it, bigpic.me/cc38. And I think we're going to take a break from having guests. It's going to be hard to do better than these two that we've had here. So it may just be the four of us bantering. So bigpic.me/cc38. And Amanda, you want to give a plug and discussion of the Data Visualization Society? You appear to be muted.
For anyone who's new to the chart chat and hasn't heard about us, the Data Visualization Society is a global organization for data viz professionals, but also enthusiasts, people who do a little bit of chart design as part of their jobs, that aims to nurture, celebrate, and advance the field of data visualization. We've got a lot of fun and interesting things coming up. Our members just got access to the digital copy of Print Nightingale, our journal, issue number 2 that landed in the member portal this week. We've got the launch of the next membership cohort or the mentorship cohort, some new workshops and other things coming up. So we hope you'll check out DVS if you want to stay connected to the data viz community.
And if you want to continue the discussion, I know Stephanie and Steve have more stuff they can share and you can speak with them directly. Please join me and my co-hosts at bigpic.me/party. That's just going to take you to a Zoom link. And we will not be serving snacks. You'll have to bring your own. And with that, Amanda, if you can take us out with the chart chat closing theme, and I will see you all on the other side at the Zoom meeting, bigpic.me/party. Thank you so much, Jeff. Thank you so much, Andy and Amanda, and a very special thanks to Stephanie and Steve for the work that you're doing and your willingness to take the time to share it with us today. Thanks
Thank you so much.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
See you all soon.